2. Use dating apps to eat at 5-star restaurants without ever paying a dime until the quiet guy from work matched with me. I thought he was just another lonely wallet. Until he said, "Actually, I think you suggested this place, didn't you?" That's when I realized I'd just been played at my own game. By the time our server brought the check, I was ready to get out of there and write this date off as a boring but expensive win. The total had to be close to $200 with everything I'd ordered, which would make this one of my biggest scores ever. I excused myself to the bathroom to give Daniel time to handle the bill like a gentleman. And when I came back, I was planning to suddenly remember that early morning I had or that headache that was starting to come on, my usual exit strategy that had worked dozens of times before. But when I sat back down, Daniel was just sitting there with the check folder in front of him, making no move to reach for his wallet or credit card. He had this weird expression on his face, like he was waiting for something. And that's when he said the words that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. "I think we should split this bill." The words hit me like I'd been slapped. For a second, I just sat there staring at him like he'd started speaking a foreign language. Split the check? That wasn't how this worked. That wasn't how any of this had ever worked. I had just spent 2 hours listening to him talk about his dead wife and his boring job. I'd smiled and laughed at his mediocre jokes. I'd played the part of interested date perfectly. And now he wanted me to pay for my own meal? The bill was sitting right there between us. I could see the total through the semi-transparent folder. And suddenly, I felt sick in a completely different way than I'd been planning to feel. "Split it?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady even though inside I was starting to panic. I thought since you asked me out. But Daniel wasn't budging. He had this annoyingly calm expression on his face, like he'd been expecting this exact moment. And that's when I knew something was seriously wrong. No guy had ever asked me to split a check. Ever. Even the cheap ones who ordered water at the side salad still paid for everything because that's what men do when they want to get it in your pants. This was breaking every rule of dating that I'd learned to exploit. "I think it's only fair," Daniel said, and I wanted to throw my water glass at his stupid, reasonable face. Fair? There was nothing fair about this. I'd gotten dressed up. I'd driven all the way downtown. I'd wasted my entire evening pretending to be interested in his tragic backstory. And now he expected me to pay $96 for the privilege because that's what my portion came to, $96.37 of money I absolutely did not have. I tried to salvage the situation, laughing like he was joking and reaching across the table to touch his hand. "Come on, you're being silly. You invited me out, remember?" But Daniel just smiled this horrible, knowing smile and said, "Actually, I think you suggested this place, didn't you?" And that's when I realized he knew. Somehow, this boring widower had figured out my entire system. And now he was playing games with me. My face started getting hot, and my hands were shaking, not from embarrassment, but from pure rage. Who did this guy think he was? I could have stayed home and ordered takeout instead of sitting through this nightmare date. And now he was trying to make me pay for food I wouldn't have even ordered if I'd known I was buying it myself. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice sweet even though I wanted to scream at him, "I didn't bring enough cash for this. I was expecting." But he cut me off before I could finish my excuse. "There's an ATM by the front door," he said, still wearing that awful calm expression that made me want to slap him. "I can wait while you take care of your portion." The server was hovering nearby, probably wondering why we were taking so long with a simple bill, and other couples were starting to glance in our direction. This was becoming exactly the kind of scene I'd spent months avoiding, which was the absolute last thing I needed. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to get out of this without actually paying. But Daniel seemed prepared for every excuse I could think of. When I claimed my card might not work, he offered to spot me the cash if I paid him back later. When I said I had to get home early for work, he said he was perfectly happy to wait while I figured out the payment situation. When I suggested we could just leave and sort it out later, he pointed out that we couldn't exactly walk out on the bill. He had an answer for everything, like he'd been planning this whole scenario in advance. The worst part was the way he was looking at me, like he could see right through every lie I was telling. Usually, when I made excuses to guys, they were so desperate to believe I wasn't rejecting them that they'd go along with whatever story I fed them. But Daniel was watching me struggle with this expression that was almost like pity, and it made my skin crawl. "Are you sure there isn't someone you could call?" he asked, like he was being helpful instead of completely destroying my life. "Maybe a friend who could Venmo you the money?" I had no choice but to walk to that ATM like I was heading to my own execution. And every step felt like my dignity was being stripped away piece by piece. The machine wanted to charge me $3.50 just to access my own money, which meant this disaster was going to cost me almost exactly $100 total. $100 I didn't have for a meal I never should have had to pay for, with a man who had somehow turned my foolproof system against me. My checking account balance flashed on the screen, $238 until my next paycheck. And I wanted to punch the wall. This was grocery money. This was gas money. This was the money I needed to make it through the rest of the week. And now it was going toward the most expensive humiliation of my entire life. I stood there staring at that ATM screen for probably 2 full minutes, trying to figure out if there was any way to get out of this. But Daniel was still sitting at our table waiting for me. And the server was still hovering. And I couldn't exactly make a run for it without making everything 10 times worse. So I took out the cash and walked back to that table feeling like a criminal walking to the electric chair. When I slapped the money down on the table harder than necessary and grabbed my purse, ready to storm out and never think about this nightmare again, Daniel said something that stopped me completely cold. Give my regards to Casper when you see him at work on Monday. The bottom fell out of my world. Casper, my coworker Casper, who always rolled his eyes at my dating stories and acted like he was so much better than me. Daniel knew Casper, which meant Casper had told him about my dinner date strategy, which meant this whole evening had been a setup from the very beginning. I'd been played by the two most boring men I'd ever met, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it.